satisfied with the work done in pre-season, there was one concern gnawing at Graham Souness as matters got underway for real. The only worry on the horizon is the constant fear of injuries to key players, he wrote in his diary on the 12th of August. Last season was a nightmare for us, and since I came here as manager, I found it hard to come to terms with the amount of injuries we pick up. For understandable reasons, Souness compared so much of his Rangers experience with his time at Anfield and initially was amazed at how his Liverpool side could win a title using only 14 players when he had used 26 and 29 players in his first 2 seasons respectively. Eventually he realised that the reality of being a Rangers player is that every week is someone's cup final. He realised the story about Bill Struth told to him by the veteran football writer Jim Roger when he used to say to potential signings, "I hear you're a great player, son, but can you play for Rangers?" That, according to Souness, was what it was all about. The ability to face up to the unrelenting physical and mental pressure of life in the small pond. On 8th of October, his side's unbeaten start to the season would face its biggest threat. To discuss that and many other things, I am joined on Dominant this week by David Edgar. How are we, David?
Hello, I'm great, mate. Very good to be back. Looking forward to getting into this. This is a huge season in my childhood and in my life, and it's going to be a joy to talk about it.
Good. Looking forward to it as well. And with David for this season anyway comes Alan Bradley. Good evening, Alan.
Yeah, good evening. Yeah, all fine here. Like David, really looking forward to this. And one of my favourite seasons. I think the last time David and I were on, it was, my goodness, everything that could go wrong. It did go wrong, so really looking forward to this one as well. Yeah,
I don't want to go over all ground because John and Andy obviously covered the start of this season last week, but it really was a case of, for the first and I think only time really with Souness in his 5 seasons, out the starting blocks with real purpose, real quality, and spending the rest of the season keeping other teams at arm's length. That really was the luxury Souness afforded himself, David. Before we get into some of the details around the show, really around his obsession, his paranoia about injuries, and understandable as it would turn out. Your thoughts on this side in general? I think in terms of balance, between this blend of steel and skill that Souness often struggled with, getting that balance right, I think this is one of the most underrated Rangers teams of all time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And a large part of it is obviously fondness from childhood, but I have gone back and watched a lot of the evidence, if you like, the matches, the highlights, the full matches that are available of this team. And I think when you watch old football, and unfortunately now, 34 years, this is old football. You go much further back and you compare it to what you watch these days, where the athleticism through the roof and the skill level is magnificent, the pitches are better. It sometimes compares badly, and it's not fair to do that, but it's hard not to. I think this Rangers team compares pretty well to modern football. I think it's sharp, it's incisive, it's strong. It's got a physicality that you needed then that you probably wouldn't be, no probably about it, you wouldn't be allowed now. But they could play, they could really play. They were tactically switched on as well. And little things like their ability to press. We mentioned McCoist over in Romania last week wasn't an isolated incident. Their ability to use the space and things that are commonplace in football now that really weren't discussed at all then. They really weren't things that you heard or read about. I think this team had it in abundance. And as you say, there's a balance, there's a symmetry to it that's absolutely lovely. I think us males in particular we've got a thing about symmetry. If you've ever sat at dinner with a group of men and women, the men will always sort their cutlery into right angles and perfectly equidistant from each other, and this side has that. It's got a lovely pleasing geometry to it, and it's got skill. It does have skill. It's got passers, it's got people who can beat a man, it's got great delivery from the wide areas, it's got raw athleticism as well, at levels that we maybe hadn't necessarily seen before in those positions.
Gary Stevens. Yeah, absolutely. The best on the bleep test by miles after Italy. Just an absolute athlete.
a machine, and you didn't get right backs in Scotland really before, did you? You know, Alan, it was kind of like the right back was the guy who sort of was, you know, the defender for that bottom corner of the field. That was pretty much all there was to it.
Yeah, the only exception would have been, believe it or not, Sandy Jardine.
Sandy Jardine. To be
yeah.
fair, maybe McGrain. If you're
Yes.
really, you know, to be fair, maybe McGrain. But then that's why they were the standouts of, you know, their entire generations. It just wasn't common.
I think what you've said as well about the kind of mixture and the balance and so on, absolutely. But at the internationals as well, you just need to look along. You know, Butcher, Goff, Woods, you know, the likes of Gary Stevens, McCoist, you know, obviously Durant would have been too, Wilkins. You know, you can see right across the whole team. You know, there was just so much in terms of quality. But you're right. I think we mentioned the previous season. Believe it or not, I was optimistic at this one because I just thought who we had now with Ian Ferguson coming in too. And we had, Martyn, I think you mentioned it, the ability as well to handle that Scottish, you know, the fact that you do need to be able to get in there and dig in, Derek Ferguson's and so on. But again, some of the play, as you said, David, and you watch some of the old games, some of the kind of the linking and the way they're passing, even if you look at some of the European stuff as well, some real quality all over. So, no, I mean, this definitely, I think this team's definitely underrated.
Oh, I couldn't. I mean, I had that position and opinion before I started this project, but it's been reinforced. I don't know if anyone's read Sandy Jameson's book on Graham Souness, the Ibrox Revolution and the legacy of the Iron Ladies man. It's an interesting book. Some of the political stuff, the political arguments are interesting. You can get on board with them. Sandy, I don't know him. He comes across as this kind of self-loathing West of Scotland Protestant kind of guy. He now has a website set up for Celtic supporters and basically people that have a kind of wider appreciation of football outside, you know, the British Isles. Is very very right on and hip, would probably be the best way to describe it. But when reviewing the football during Souness's years, he admitted that, you know, his assumptions were, and this book was written 97, 98, around that time. His assumptions were that this would be kind of dour and prosaic and this kind of Calvinist pragmatism that we talk about, and he found himself having to reassess that in terms of its quality, in terms of its style, in terms of its balance, in terms of the genuinely entertaining, exciting games that made up such a large part of this period. But let's get moving with the time that we have to look at tonight. We're going to start 8th of October. As I said, Rangers unbeaten. They're 3 points ahead in the league, just one draw and the 6 wins. And they got up to Pittodrie, not a fixture that needed any extra spice. But, you know, Souness not ever completely settled, was he, with his squad. He always liked to tinker and a dip into the market. And he brought another midfielder to Ibrox, a former Aberdeen player, which probably didn't go down particularly well, Neil Cooper. This was mainly because yet another falling out with Derek Ferguson. He failed to make the squad 16 times in that first 20 games. So this was Souness maybe thinking, you know, he's definitely on the way out. I'll bring a replacement in already. Souness wouldn't start this game. Cooper would. He scored the opening goal, celebrates wildly. The tone is set. It is a frenzy of a game. Jim Bett equalised, and Charlie Nicholas grabbed a winner for Aberdeen with a kind of weird looping header with only 5 minutes to go. So the first defeat. Souness said it was a disappointment, but the result did not matter to any of us. Mark Walters called it one of the dirtiest matches I've ever played in. He failed to come back out for the second half due to an injury. McCoy's needed stitches in his head. John Brown suffered a bad leg injury. All were trivial, David, in comparison to the game's main incident. 8 minutes was all it took. Neil Cooper had won the ball from John Hewitt, got back to his feet, and he was clattered into by Robert Connor. Referee Louis Thau blew his whistle for the free kick as the ball just ran into space near Ian Durant. Now, normally more aware than most players in Scotland about what was happening around him in a football field, he uncharacteristically relaxed, slowed down to control the ball and maybe try for a quick free kick. Despite being the player closest to the referee's whistle, Neil Simpson's rage carried him through regardless, and a young career was left hanging in the balance, David.
I don't think you have to be aware on a football field of someone assaulting you, and that's what this was. This was not a tackle. This was a very deliberate stamp in an attempt to seriously injure a fellow professional footballer, and he succeeded in it. This was violence, and it wasn't in any way something that you could say was a part of the rough and tumble of a normal game. It was absolutely vile. Over the years, I've read a lot of people say, "Oh, the worst thing that can happen on a football park is spitting." No, it's not. This is the worst thing that can happen on a football park. It's someone trying to end your career, and that's what Neil Simpson did. And with it being overly dramatic, he should have been, cast aside from football wherever it's played, because this was a brutal, unprovoked, unnecessary, successful, sadly, attempt to hurt someone, and he very badly did hurt someone at a period in history where a knee injury could end your career. These days we're much more common, although we've still seen players come back not the same player, but in those days an ACL was quite often a death sentence for your career. And that's what he's gone in. He's gone in to hurt somebody. He's stamped on him, and he succeeds. And for me, it's unforgivable. It is with malice. It's something he's decided he's going to do, and he does it. And I just find any chatter on this as absolutely unbearable about. We've heard from people in the Scottish media saying, well, Neil Simpson suffered as well. Well, good. So he should have. He did it. It wasn't Ian Durrant, who is not in any way, in any shape to blame. It's repulsive. It's a repulsive incident. And I think it says a lot that it's, the last glorious thing in Aberdeen's history. Yeah, they were probably upset about Neil Cooper because he was a really good player. And I think they felt he was one of their own. They brought him through. He was part of the Gothenburg team. He'd gone down south, money. He was actually a cracking player up at Aberdeen. I didn't see a lot of his time down south, or any really of his time down south, so I can't comment. But at Aberdeen, he was a tremendous midfielder. All energy and guts and glory with an underrated ability to pass. And at £250,000 for Souness to snap him up made absolutely perfect sense. It would be silly not to buy a player of that quality at that kind of money. So Aberdeen have decided, that they don't like this, and it's again part of this. They've been top dogs and they're not top dogs anymore. And they could not handle it, despite at the time having a very good side. You mentioned some of the names there, Jim Bett, Charlie Nicholas. These are quality players, and they were, certainly in the conversation to win a league title, certainly in consideration for any domestic trophy in Scotland. But they knew that they weren't the story, and they had been the story, in Scotland and out with Scotland in the first half of the 80s. They had been. And they knew that this regression to normal, which was the old firm, I think they sensed, maybe even on a subconscious level, that was it. We have had the best time in our history, and it is now coming to an end. It wasn't completely over. They were still more than capable of winning trophies, but they did know that in terms of this dominance and this, new firm thing was over almost before it had began. You mentioned earlier the amount of injuries Rangers suffer. Well, there's a few reasons for it, and Souness couldn't get his head around it. One is conditioning. Players didn't look after themselves. We know that. There's so much evidence of it. Two is the shabby medical treatment they got, best exemplified by Phil Boersma putting Ian Durrant up on picking him up and giving him basically a backie off the park. Phil Boersma's an ex-footballer. He wasn't what the hell is he doing as Rangers physio? Because he was a friend of Souness's. So Souness has to take some responsibility for this.
You could see the leg. You could actually see the leg below the knee just kind of moving, and of all, that's the one where you've really got to, kind of make sure everything's secure. And to do that, Ian, I don't know, Ian Durrant's, potentially it could have made things a lot worse, David.
I've got zero doubt that it did. And again, you can put the argument forward that, we didn't know as much in those days. Well, we should have, and we should have had a qualified professional physiotherapist there, and we should have had the proper equipment. If a player got carried off down south, he got carried off. He got stuck on a stretcher and carried off. So I have kind of limited sympathy for this idea that Souness was tearing his hair out about injuries. If he didn't know, he should have done. Rangers were not adequately prepared at this point. We know that British players in general did not look after themselves in this era, which of course makes them more susceptible to injuries. Martyn, you and I have discussed in the past, Brian. Yeah, but you and I have discussed in the past Brian Robson. Brian Robson.
Yeah.
What wonderful footballer, but a guy who would, by his own admission, drink 9 pints every second night, and wondering why he was generally getting, picking up injuries in training. That your body was struggling as it was, with the amount of football that was played in this era. There was a lot of it, the kind of pitches you were playing on, and then you would, go and get, go and treat your body like that in your leisure time. So it's a combo of those things added into the ferocious football matches that Rangers would often find themselves in, added into the fact that it was a time where you could tackle in a far more aggressive and dangerous way. But on this particular incident, I just think the whole thing it still has the capacity even now to make me angry. First of all, what happened to Ian Durrant. Secondly, the complete lack of remorse and punishment for the perpetrator. And thirdly, the way almost immediately from the second the incident happens, his treatment was mishandled.
Yeah, I mean, we discussed it on a previous show with John and Andy, I think. Might have been talking about the butcher.
You're telling him to stamp it. You've broken your leg to stamp it and see if it's okay.
Run it off, son.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing, I think I've said this before, but this whole project, these 12 years, it is a study of modernisation and some advances, some successful attempts at modernising the club, and some unsuccessful. And I would say, broadly speaking, you can graph that in two ways. That the first 5-6 years probably is the height of things working and taking off and succeeding, and Rangers pushing ahead with this, that and the other, on the field, off the field, and maybe that decline, that regression, that narrower focus, more parochial focus. But you're absolutely right, and when it comes to medical care, when it comes to the physio, it's an old pals act. It's this incident here redolent of 70s practices that are well out of date by 1988, and the whole thing, the treatment of them, the viciousness of the assault, it just said that Scottish football was just not moving. It just, Rangers were doing their bit, but still, even internally, we weren't pushing all the buttons at that particular moment. Alan, Durrant, I mean, this still happens now. There's plenty of issues, not just in Scotland, but England as well. I'm sure all over Europe. I understand when an incident like this happens, a hero is injured. That the player, the club that carried out that incident are hated for a long time. I get that. That makes sense to me. A support has lost something, and they blame it on this club, this player. What I never get is the booing, the abuse for the player that's been injured. Durrant was booed off. There were people queuing up to boo and scream abuse at him as he was carried onto the bus. And this is the other thing, by the way, not in an ambulance to hospital, into the team bus and strapped to the back seat. out the game, Gerrard, I mean, he obviously went on painkillers. David Holmes sat with him all through the second half, all through the game. So it was a very early injury. Basically just sitting with him and promising that, we'll stand by you, you'll be all right, which he did, and he was also true to his word. But this absolute visceral hatred for the victim, I've never understood.
No, I mean, Martyn, a few things. Durrant was the hottest property, I think, in Scottish football, potentially British.
Yeah.
The way he'd been developing over those. So there was that one. There was the fact that it's within the first few minutes as well, which kind of makes you think, who am I up against? I'm going to get in early. I'll maybe just get a warning. I think David and I, the last time we were on, we talked about Souness and some of his ridiculous stuff as well. But we said, okay, we'd be a wee bit hypocritical if the guy was playing an hour. But I think Neil Simpson went way, way over. He went way over that line, I feel. But the other one too that gets me, and I don't think I am the exception, it's this Aberdeen Rangers thing. Now, if that was Paul McStay putting my hands up and he went off, I really don't think we would be, well, certainly the decent Rangers fans, seeing something like that happening. But it's the way that the Aberdeen fans at that point in time, but again, continuing, with this, I just can't get my head around that one at all.
Can I
Aaron Ramsey, David.
Suggestion?
Aaron Ramsey would be another one, David, wouldn't he?
He got it from Stoke, yeah.
Yeah,
he got it.
I don't get it.
That tackle.
Do not understand.
Well, here's my theory on it. You're welcome to shoot it down, but again, I go back to Aberdeen fans, and this was really formed in the 90s, this opinion. Aberdeen fans watched this era. First of all, it slowed down, after Ferguson left, and then it absolutely just came to a full stop. Full stop under Willie Miller. They were the treble runners up 92, 93. You'll get to that, Martyn. They were the treble runner-up. He changed the team completely that summer, and they just avoided relegation. And since then, Aberdeen have been a joke club. This then was the era of 8-0s and Ebby Skovdahl and through the 90s, I felt that this Durrant thing, which hadn't been that prevalent early on. Immediately after it became such a big thing. Similarly, songs about the Ibrox disaster became such a big thing. Yeah. My theory on it is that as Aberdeen fans realised that they were going further and further away from that period when they were the best club in the country and out with Scotland, people respected them, and they were becoming worse and worse and worse and a joke, that their fans adopted this almost compensatory, well, to make up for it, right, that we can no longer taunt you that we're better than you. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to become the most offensive that we can possibly be. We're going to become like the Roy Chubby Brown of Scottish football. And what we'll do is, we know we can't lord it over you. So what we'll do is we'll sicken you.
It's disgusting. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Absolutely, and the fact they began to revel in it, I don't think is coincidental that it came at a time when their team lapsed into, as I say, this sort of joke area, and now Aberdeen are what they've always been, bar that amazing 5-year period, and not even anywhere close to what they had been in the 5 years after it. Now they are basically just a provincial club with a support. They're not the third biggest club in the country, even. That's Hearts. And I think that this, it's a way to stay relevant in their mind. It doesn't translate, but it's a way to stay relevant. And their argument for it, I've heard this put forward by Aberdeen fans, as well, it annoys you. And you're like, well, great. If that's how you want to be, we could all do that. We could all go in there and sing 6 songs about
people dying, people being
dying, or murders, etc. But we like to think that we're all, a wee bit more mature than that. And I think it's the other way they have, Martyn and Alan, of clinging on to this rivalry. Now, you speak to any Rangers fan and we'll always say it, you're not our rivals. We don't look for your result. If you're playing Celtic, we want you to win. You are not our rivals. It's like saying that Manchester City's big rivals are Stockport County. just because they're geographically in the same country. It just isn't true. But I think in their mind, they're like, but you get so annoyed at us that we must be your rivals. It's like, well, no, we get annoyed at you because you're not even following basic standards of decency.
I think the thing that annoys me more, David, as well, is you're saying the average fan, they're fans. But again, to me, that's the kind of thing where the board and the people in the club, but again, they just seem to be, let's not piss off, our home fans. But
because they've gone down to this rump now. If you look at their average attendances in this period, Martyn will be able to I'd imagine they'd be around about 18,000, 19,000 mark.
Yeah, that stadium's decent.
About that, yeah. Over the years, it's dropped now to a hardcore of about 8,000, right? Of which, by the way, a large chunk are home and away fans. But that is it now. That's the people who will go to Aberdeen matches, with the exception of Rangers matches. So you're right. I think that they have been given carte blanche, and as the percentage of those fans has grown because the overall amount of fans is reducing, then they've become more powerful at Aberdeen. But yeah, to me, it is just an almost childish. I'll get trouble as a form of attention as well. I'll get attention off you by shouting and bawling, and it's to try and manufacture some sort of rivalry with us that just isn't there in the mind of any Rangers fan.
It's an interesting. I accept the theory for now. And accept the theory for the last 20 odd years, because I think that's fair to say. And yes, there would be a definite sense that post Fergie, where's the club going? Souness arrival, here's Rangers taking over, and that causes tension. And yes, at this moment in time, Celtic are the champions, the reigning champions. But the irony here for the next 3 or 4 years is Aberdeen. We'll get to 92-93 obviously in due course, but I remember going to a specific midweek game at Pittodrie, very defining game in that season actually.
The Gorham game.
The Gorham game and the Hateley header. Saying to my dad, you're more nervous for this than Parkhead by a mile. This is a bigger game. Far bigger game than Celtic. The Celtic challenge, as we will talk about and enjoy over the next few groups of shows, disappears to comedy levels. It is Aberdeen. It's not as strong, clearly, because spoiler alert, Rangers win quite a few league titles, but it is there, and it would get very fucking close. Don't forget, on one of those occasions, until that's a moment. May 91, where pretty much it's over. But this thing is utterly visceral from the day. This isn't some kind of postmodern next generation of wind-up merchants, which of course there is, and they enjoy songs about things that didn't happen in their lifetime in order to get a rise, and it's all part of that. That's nothing. It's nothing specific to Aberdeen Rangers either, by the way. That is through. I go back to the Aaron Ramsey Stoke thing. There's just this weird reaction to a dreadful injury like that. Despite the Neil Simpson assault, gentlemen, the police had a wee look at this game and were potentially involved in an incident around this game. Does anyone know who was involved in that incident?
No.
Thanks for.
I remember a report, but
thanks for doing your prescribed reading. Terry Butcher kicked the referee's door in. It would not be the last door that Terry Butcher kicked in, and obviously with police action hanging over him, that would be a nervy few weeks before that was finally kind of put to bed. Terry Butcher did not travel home in the Rangers bus. Him and his wife shared an evening of dinner and stayed at the house of Willie Miller and his wife that night. It's a weird old game of football with all this visceral rivalry, and then once it's all done, they're all showered and life goes on, almost as if it's a bit pantomime at times. No pantomime for Ian Durrant. The damage, medial, anterior and posterior ligament all ruptured, and the lateral one stretched. The surgeon likened it to something from a serious car crash. Durrant said that the faces on Souness, Smith and Holmes were like mourners at his bedside when he came round, and the surgeon delivered the message that he may never play again. 21 years of age, his club's most prized asset, and really the potential to carry his country to levels they'd never reached, never mind just Rangers. It could all have just been switched off. But the club were true to Holmes' word. Their investment and dedication to his long-term recovery was made. But yet again, for Graham Souness and Rangers, the autumn had brought around a major injury. Still, Rangers were only 2 points clear at the top after that game, that defeat at Pittodrie. Following on that was a midweek visit to Hibs, who the only other side to take anything from Rangers, a 0-0 draw. What could have been precarious was actually comfortable. McCoist's excellent strike, 23rd minute, all that was required, and the gap was actually...
Great finish.
Yeah, it was a super finish. Gap was extended by another point. And this theme, as I said before, of strong front runners, just riding out storms, having that buffer, using the buffer, because this is new, right? The first 2 seasons under Souness is a shambles at the start, and we've got this kind of chaotic sense of trying to recapture a deficit. It's not the case here. There will be a 1-1 draw at St Mirren at the end of October, but the only damage done there...
Furthering my opinion that I've never seen a good Rangers game at St Mirren.
No, I don't think you have. 1-1, but Alan McCoist down with another injury, a hamstring injury, that would keep him out until January. The equaliser, a very late equaliser that day, was scored by another new short-term recruit and a lifelong fan, Andy Gray. He'd been brought up in September when both McCoist and Drinkle were kind of out with short-term hamstring problems, just providing that kind of cover. He popped up at the death in Paisley to keep that momentum going. I was there that day. I sat on an iron bar because I was far too short to stand in the terraces of Love Street and see anything. Dreadful game of football. Rangers 1-0 down, 85 minutes or whatever. Told my dad I'm too cold, or just he's too sore, my bum's numb or whatever, can I get down now? He said yeah, sure. My feet hit the floor as Andy Gray's head hit the ball, and everyone else just jumped up, so I missed the fucking goal. But Gray popped up that day. He actually would score the following week in a 3-0 win over Hearts, and it was Hearts that Rangers faced when Gray arrived back in September in the Skull League Cup semi-final. Rangers didn't have a recognised striker on the field. They used Scott Nisbet and Mark Walters, an improvised front
celebration,
and both scored. Yeah, but indeed, both scored in 3-0 win, which brought Rangers to play Aberdeen once again in the Skull Cup the Skull Cup final. Gents, this is just 2 weeks after the game at Pittodrie. Concerns, I think, were high about a revenge match. The BBC had Alan Ferguson, the former Grade 1 referee, in as part of their lineup. Now, never in a million years would Alan Ferguson, a Grade 1 referee, be part of the BBC Scotland Cup final lineup, unless that was a topic of conversation, which of course it was. He said, I'm absolutely astonished at the naivety of the Aberdeen management and Aberdeen as a club that Simpson is actually on the park today. I think if you're trying to stop vendettas happening, then you have to remove the source of the vendetta in the first place. It was on Souness' mind. He was trying to find a balance between avoiding mayhem, which is ironic, and curbing that natural aggression that obviously Rangers would need to win to win a cup game. But it was not easy when the impact of Durrant's injury was still so raw. He said Durrant was one of the most popular players in the dressing room. Everyone had been upset about the injuries. In the end, all those fears were misplaced, as both sides, even with this rivalry starting to rise to preeminence in the country, played out another fantastic cup final.
Always a nerve-wracking experience for a player at any time, but in the cup final, the Dutch goalkeeper to face Ali McCoist. He's done it. 1-0 for Rangers. And this was the clinical way that McCoist decided to put Rangers in front. Minutes gone. Aberdeen with the corner kick, and that's the equaliser. God. And Ferguson was a brilliant goal. Rangers showing a little bit of the quality that attracted Souness and others in the first place. Here's Bat. There's Dodds, and that's in the equaliser. A brilliant goal by Dodds. Run there by Ferguson. Here's a chance and a brilliant save. What an ending to this game. 2 minutes left. Superb entertainment. The both teams fighting to the end with a lot of good football. Now this is good goalkeeping. That could have broken anyway. Goff is there. And it's there. Ali McCoy's. For Rangers, only a couple of minutes left, and that ball bounced agonisingly for Aberdeen down to McCoist and snelled it right through his legs, would you believe? An incredible ending, and there goes the final whistle. The Skull Cup for the 5th year in succession goes to Ibrox.
Alan, almost impossible to top the previous season's final in terms of drama and excitement and, 120 minutes and penalties, the whole 9 yards. But this ran it damn close. Maybe slightly all-round better technical quality in the game, but still another classic cup final, breathless.
Absolutely, yeah. I think early on, Davy Robertson, who would come to us, makes a mess, obviously, the throw-in. I think Drinkle manages to get by Snellers and pulled down. Yeah, we go 1-0 up, but great finish by McCoy's. Then the kind of, I don't know, Woods does a Superman impersonation, doesn't he, from across. Grin kind of misses it, falls to Davy Dodds to go to us, and obviously then it's one each. David Edgar, we had 2 men in the post, and Neil Cooper, and still couldn't stop this one, yeah. And then obviously second half, one of my favourite players of all time, Rangers, Ian Ferguson, with just that wonderful scissor kick coming over for the right-hand side in the penalty spot. Just the way he finished it, the celebration. I seem to remember, I don't know, was it Sports Scene or whatever they had then, did they not maybe show that in future ones at the start of it? Yeah, but it's just one of those most famous goals. On the Ian Ferguson thing, just thinking about him as well, I mean, obviously loved the Rangers, tough, could play anywhere, the power in his shot as well, and the acceleration that he had at that point. Clearly we changed things later on, but you kind of built him up a wee bit. He played more of the kind of holding or, more of that kind of defensive one, but I just loved Ian Ferguson. I just thought, to me, he just typified that great Rangers spirit and fantastic player, just really unfortunate, I think, in terms of injuries over the next few seasons as well, but
yeah, it would take a while. It would take a while to become Fergie.
I think Martyn, because of the loving the Rangers and the boy growing up, some of those guys tend to do that as if they're trying a wee bit too hard, as opposed to some
and playing through injuries that other pros wouldn't.
As a wee twinge, I'll be careful here. I think I'll set aside. He wasn't going to do that.
Or just be a professional and say, I'm not ready to play. I will do myself more harm. I'll play when I'm ready. But yeah, you're absolutely right. He's going to run through and through brick walls. And it probably wasn't until 92, 93, to be honest, that you got that consistency out of Ian Ferguson. Maybe. Davey, 2-2. And you're in the realms of this happening again. The last half an hour of that game is wildly exciting if you're a neutral. There's chances all over the place, but there would be one more chance, and of course it would fall to McCoist in the box, a very typical Ali finish, Davey. But I go back again, so much fun, this competition, so much fun, these finals.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful games, and terrestrial television, and everyone was aware of it and watched it, and it was this very quick competition as well at the start of the season. So it had a momentum and an impetus. And yeah, look, the game itself, I mean, I was, I'll excuse myself and say I was 10, but I couldn't understand why one of our players didn't go out and smash Neil Simpson, and
Yeah.
my dad explained he'd get sent off, and I said, well, if we're winning at the end, can one of them do it? And my dad, wonderful man that he is, went, well, I would hope so. So I wasn't exactly discouraged.
Nearly scored, Davey.
Discouraged.
Nearly scored. A beautiful chip, very clever from a free kick, and Woods is scrambling to tip that over the back.
Yeah, he did, and it was a hell of a stop, which a smaller man wouldn't have managed, incidentally. Chris Woods was a giant of a goalkeeper. But the game itself was, I would argue it's a better game from a technical point of view than the one the previous year, because the defending, as you pointed out, Martin, on this show, and that game the year before is like...
It's comic, wasn't it?
Yeah. Have these guys met before, and were they aware of the concept of a football before? Whereas this year, it's a high-quality game, and you look at the quality of the goals. People have to work, I think, a bit harder for them. Some of the passing and play from both sides, in all fairness, was good. I mean, Aberdeen had some ball players in there. This is not a side that are a kick and rush mob. Of course, they also have a target man, and that is never a bad thing in Scottish football. We know that Souness enjoyed it, but we go into the lead, and you're feeling pretty good. But Ian Ferguson was, I think, a very my generation player, because this might be a wee bit difficult for people who maybe only caught him in the 90s to understand, but he was like Scottish football's glamour boy. He'd come through at St Mirren, and he had the highlights in his hair, and he was cool, and Rangers wanted him, Manchester United wanted him, there was talk Liverpool and Arsenal wanted him. He scores a winning goal in the cup final, which at that time was a massive thing. He scores a winning goal for St Mirren, and he cost £1 million. So all of that added up. He was really popular with people my age, because of all that. In the way that Alfredo is cool with young people these days. So when he scored that goal, he told us on Heart and Hand, the interviews in the archives, folk, that he slipped, and he didn't mean it. And I told him he was talking bollocks. He said with a smile, "That wasn't a bad one, was it?" It really was not a bad one. And the commentary from Archie, I do my research. I watched this the other night, and the commentary from Archie, where he goes, "And the man who cost £1 million started to pay that back." Incidentally, Archie wanted value for money. It's a stupendous goal, and the celebration's great. The way he runs off to
the hand,
the hand up in the air. The one arm up in the air, and the game's drawing on. I thought Aberdeen had won it when that chance comes in the last minute. I think, well, there you go. That's and I died 1,000 deaths in the time it came for that one to not end up in the back of the net. But I'm kind of settling down for extra time at this point. Last year, I think we're going on all the way at this point. I think we're going to have a repeat of what we saw the previous year, and then it falls. And this is the thing, when I talk a lot about, well, Ali was our Roy of the Rovers. It's things like this. This is a last-minute winner in an epic cup final that nobody even talks about, because he's got so many of these things. But of course, Ali McCoist gets the winner in the last minute of a cup final. Of course he does, because that's what he did. And we talk about this nowhere near enough, as if this is something that happens regularly. And it's a last-minute winner in an epic cup final between two really seriously good teams. But it was just him, and the smile as he runs away could have lit up the whole of that area. He was at his kind of cheeky chappy best in that moment. But again, these are the things that even as a kid I knew it was just utter rubbish, that people would say, he's lucky, the ball keeps falling to him in the box. And I thought, well, how come it doesn't keep falling to anybody else in the box? It's that instinct.
Sorry.
I'll just go there. I'll just be here. I'll wait here, and he's there to tuck it away.
Yes, if you watch him, David. Obviously the Hibs one, the overhead kick, the whole. It's a movie. a decent one. McCoist's his record, and as you say, all of those wonderful goals that away at Leeds, the whole thing. But what I loved about him was it was that whole kind of movement. I remember seeing him after he had finished with us and Kilmarnock, and they used to do those charity. I don't know if you guys can remember. Maybe it would be up at St James's Park or whatever, but one of those kind of soccer aid thingies or whatever.
Yeah.
And I remember him coming on then, and obviously the size of him at that point in time, he only came on about 15 minutes or so. And I was saying to Martyn, watch this. And I'm telling you, the ball came into the box the way, like a John Robertson, but the way McCoist just faded one way, turned both. And I'm sure in a couple of them, he just scored these goals. And as you say, it wasn't a luck at all. Do you know what I mean?
Do you remember the game against AC Milan legends? And Alex
That's right.
on the bench, and he was a big individual at this point.
Great finish, yeah.
And well, ball comes into boom, pops the head up, nods at home. Ali McCoist, if he didn't have to run, would be able to do that in his 80s. It's just that natural, instinctive ability and sorting out your feet in time and knowing where they go, and the hunger and the desire to do it. Uh-huh. But I look, this game could have gone either way. I don't think there's a case of. There are certain matches we go, I felt we deserved to nick it. And this one, I think both teams were a wee bit unlucky if they'd lost it.
Yeah. I think it's for the neutral, it's your ideal cup final. I think you could make an argument for both teams, but those arguments are only for the pub. It's strikers, I guess, that settle these things. And here's an interesting stat that probably shows up the kind of chaos of the previous season. That incredible final we talked about there, boys, from almost exactly a year ago. There's only 2 Rangers players in this starting 11 that played in that game. Just a year ago. And that's Gough and McCoist.
Crazy, isn't it? Yeah.
So much change, so much turnover.
It felt different. That's the thing, And again, I know I talk a lot on this about feelings, and maybe it's just because, as a child, you sense a lot more than you maybe understand directly. It did feel like we were much more complete. I mentioned the last time I was on that the season before had felt that it had a ragged quality to it throughout, that it was bits and bobs just not quite fitting together. This season, almost from the off, there wasn't that. There was this sort of cohesion and this feeling that there was a place for everything and everything was in its place.
It was almost, David, as if at the start of that previous season, we didn't really have enough to, we end up signing, obviously, Walters and Wilkins and Ian Ferguson as it went through. It was almost as if the plan was ultimately to get to that one, but we couldn't, previously before the shit season. But as you say, getting to this one now, just like you'd said at the intro, you and Martyn talking about it, it was that, just the shape and the balance. You could see that things were beginning to be pulled together.
Souness thought that Ferguson was kind of unfairly maligned in that half season, less than half a season that he'd arrived before, because Souness felt he had to play him up front because of McCoist's injury. He took his hand, he raised it, and he walked him over to the Rangers support so that he got what he believed was the appropriate acclaim for his role in that cup final. And as I've written about before, 2 weeks after some midfield dynamite was removed from the team, here's another excellent midfielder just coming in to score such an important goal. This was a sense that Rangers would just be too powerful and the resources too much. Okay, so 1 cup in the bag. We've got Europe in midweek, a trip to Cologne in Germany, obviously. West Germany again, providing some difficult opposition in Europe. Souness does not make a substitute in that breathless, exhausting cup final, and he makes only 2 changes for the trip to West Germany. For 75 minutes we played the perfect European away leg in the Mungersdorf Stadium, wrote Souness later. And weirdly, Rangers did butcher the good chance. Ali McCoist missed an absolute sitter in the second half. A strangely comfortable, compact display in a difficult away leg. I think this Cologne team had 5 members of the West Germany side that would win the World Cup in 1990. Bodo Eltner, Pierre Littbarski, Thomas Hassler, Jürgen Kohler, who Mark Walter said never gave him 1 touch of the ball. But yet again, it was concentration that let Rangers down. Gary Stevens misjudged the bounce of a cross, and Olaf Jansson's lob was expertly executed with super stuff. Chris Woods was way off his line, and thus rendered helpless. 1-0, not the end of the world. We talked about this before, but within 10 minutes, the whole complexion of the tie changes. Very smart move. Butcher's dragged out of position, Goff's dragged out of position before Thomas Alof was allowed to poke it home. And again, Alan, maybe fatigue. 3 days earlier, Rangers played on that Sunday in that cup final. Not a change made. You're asking the same players to do it again. And there's maybe a bit of a tiredness, and this is when that old Rangers from the last season maybe comes out. McCoy's final minute of the game, a wild challenge, justified red card. I mean, Kevin Drinkle found the Rangers goal at Ibrox, but it was never enough, and Cologne got an equaliser with the last kick of the ball. And yet again, Europe's just remaining a mystery to the manager who had kind of conquered it so often as a player. Your memories of that Cologne doubleheader, Alan?
Yeah, obviously the first leg, as you say, I thought we were doing really well. As you say, Big Butcher put one by. The McCoy's one, I seem to remember it. It's just as if he tried to just softly chip the goalkeeper and it was cleared. But again, you're getting to 70 minutes or so and you're thinking, this is okay, again, because we're controlling things. And obviously, going 2-0 down, McCoy's, I think, sent off, it was like a stud. He jumped, didn't he? Or just like a ridiculous one at the end.
He lost his head.
Aye, which he'd done before in Europe.
He did one kick because they had an excellent defence, made an arse of it, and then the rest of the time he's just running about chasing shadows, and he lost his. Ali admitted in his book that at this stage in his career, early in his European career, before he had really established himself in Scotland even and had that international experience, the foreign defenders were able to wind him up quite often. He said in this particular game, the guy that he's tackled was watching as he walked off, and he looked up and winked at him.
And he thought, I'm not going to do that again.
And he thought, and then he mentioned that in his book, and he said, like a couple of years later, he's playing for 89. Actually, he's playing for Scotland against France, and their big defender Luke Sonner kept fouling him and pulling his hair and pulling his leg hairs and saying, "You bad player, you bad player." And he said, "I just would get up and smile and go, me bad player, but me going to the World Cup." As we knocked France out, but he learned, unfortunately, at a cost, and that cost was to us.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've got, my other one that I wanted to, I'll probably not get on the pod again, Martyn and David, so I just wanted to bring this point. In the return leg, again, atmosphere and so on, but we tried our best, not very well first half. Second half, we put them under a hell of a lot of pressure, and we did. I mean, Goff, I think, hit the post with a header and so on. We managed to get one back. Goff was actually put up front. It was a bit like what was the one against Inter Milan with John McClellan, type of, and what I wanted to kind of bring up now with Goff, and Goff without a doubt is a legend, one of the greatest Rangers players ever, that we've had. But the one thing that I always had all the way through this with Richard Goff was better in the opposition box in terms of the air. Even at Dundee United, when I saw him, obviously with the Rangers too, I felt that defensively at times, the likes of, you compare him and Butcher, obviously 6'4", I think you mentioned, but I felt at times Richard Goff defensively in the box. And I go back to the Spurs Coventry final. If you watch that one, he was the captain as well.
This was on Alan. I'm sorry to cut in. That Spurs Coventry 87 final was on. Remember when lockdown started properly? Yeah. And it was quite clear no one was getting back to anything for some time, and the weather was great. But the BBC ran all these old, because it was May, so they ran a lot of these old cup finals or whatever, and I just happened across it. Oh my word, it's a shocker.
As a centre half, I know, here we go, but it was always getting side, watching your man and so on. So I tend always to look at, and as I say, one of the greatest players, such a great athlete, originally kind of right back, great in the other box, and you'll see in this game in particular the chances, and he does it again and again. But that was my only one wee thing about Richard Goff at times, just defensively in the box. But as I say, in the second half, we battered them. The big man was great, but then I think they scored, Martyn. It was pretty much injury time or so,
it was the last
wasn't
kick of
it?
the ball, yeah.
It was gone then. Gone.
No, you'll
And
get
it
back
was-
on, because
it was already done.
I too hold this sacrilegious opinion.
I know, sorry.
Richard Gough is a top tier Ranger. He is probably the toppest of the tier in terms of captain, because he is a leader and he was the skipper, and that's why you would have him in your Rangers team, probably any Rangers team of all time, because of those qualities.
Apart from John Gregg, but on you go. Yeah, okay.
Oh, and certainly my lifetime.
Yeah, sorry.
He certainly didn't let a Celtic team run all over him, but he had that kind of quality for sure. And we will get to it in a couple of seasons when Souness again creates this maelstrom, and it's Gough that kind of leads the team through for him. He is a skipper.
Oh yes,
but
yeah.
I've never been convinced technically he had the attributes as a player that matched his attributes as a leader, as a captain. You still have him there because of those, but
yeah.
Talking about Butcher.
In the previous season,
yeah, Butcher's a different. I think Butcher's a different league.
I think if you look at, there are times even coming up through the 90s that there were seasons where Rangers in the air were an absolute nightmare defensively, and I'm thinking of the Bolly and Gough year.
Yeah, Gough's not that tall.
I'm thinking about 97, 98. No, he's not. If you look at when he was at his best in terms of us in the air, you just think back to the previous season with Roberts. He was always better as the leader of the team, sure, but the second guy in the defence.
Yes.
That it would be the kind of aggressive guy next to him, and he would be the sweeper type, if you like, in behind. But I just think that in general in these two matches, we've done that thing over in Germany that we were to do so many times, and that we were to do all throughout the 90s, which is, Stuart McCall said it very eloquently, I thought, when he said, we never really made the change from the fact that in Scotland, if we gave the ball away, we'd get it back pretty much instantly. If we gave the ball away,
it's a shot Europe, to them or a goal.
We didn't see the ball for 10 minutes, and that's how he put it. And again, we've done that, and that failure to understand that 76 minutes is not enough. It only will take 2 slips and you can be completely out the tie.
And it's so frustrating, David, because
the games in Scotland, but
because this is
100 miles an hour. They didn't. Foreign teams didn't play 100 miles an hour for 90 minutes. They ebbed and flowed that. So we're sitting quite comfortable, 60 to 70 minutes, thinking this is fine. Whereas, of course, the Germans are sitting at 60 to 70 minutes, going, right, 70 minutes, we go again. We never got our head around that.
And it frustrated the life out of Souness, because for so long Rangers have put in your archetypal away leg performance. It's very good. Should have scored that vital away goal, which in those days really was. But you're absolutely right, David. It's game management. It's composure for the entire duration. And if we're trying to be rounded and honest, as much as we'll criticise Rangers' performances in Europe, the lot didn't go the way. Really ever. The breaks just never arrived. But you make your
mentioned a very good point, though. You also make a very good point there. How often in Europe did we not take the chances that we created? How often? The exception being 92, 93. We were often guilty in Europe of making enough chances, which domestically we would have put 1 or 2 away,
but not converting them.
Not converting them when they needed converted, i.e. away from home. I can't think of many Rangers games, even when we get knocked to Red Star is one. But you watched and you were like, well, we never get a kick, we never get out of our half. That didn't happen, but we didn't take them. We weren't in anywhere near as prolific as we could be, and we were up against sides whose game management was light years ahead of ours, and they were far more able to go, right, we're up against a committed, quite talented, naive team, and they overwhelmed us with the mental side of the game.
And we have shows to discuss the Souness 5 years, which obviously ends in Belgrade, really, in Europe, and we'll try and take a kind of wider perspective of that. But I would agree with a lot of that, and yeah, we'll dig into that here. Bucharest, there's maybe another one as well, and this is another theme against bigger teams when it matters. Your golden boy that you talked about, Davey, where you roy the Rovers absolute time after time in domestic situations. And listen, filled his boots in Europe, and Morelos not that long ago overtook that record. And this will be something that is revisited again and again when the levels went up. There's something kind of missing there. Not taking chances that if it's against Motherwell, the net ripples, because he knows if it's against Motherwell, exactly. He knows if that chance happens at Fir Park, he will get another one. Yeah, but anyway,
I'll get another one 5 minutes later.
We will come to all that.
Ali couldn't have been a striker in Serie A in that era.
Nope.
Because of the whole, you get 4 chances a month.
Yeah,
Ian Rush couldn't.
No, exactly.
Rush hated it as well.
And there is a tension. And there's a breakaway, which again we'll get into. And I'm glad you mentioned Serie A, because the British style with the English style, really, that had a grip on the European Cup and other competitions as well, obviously ended with Heysel. And things are changing, shall we say. And maybe not everyone is seeing the writing on the wall. We'll finish on the 12th of November. The next Old Firm game, and once again it was a healthy, sound win for the team that conceded the first goal, but sadly Rangers were on the wrong end of this one. Mark Walters scored an early penalty, but it was cancelled out by his captain. Terry Butcher scored more goals past Chris Woods than any Premier Division striker, by the way, and just a hungrier Celtic went on to win 3-1 quite deservedly. There was a 0-0 draw at Dundee, which left Rangers only 2 points ahead of Aberdeen at the top, although 6 ahead of Celtic. But, the pressure began to build. McCoist's absence was made worse when, following the Celtic game, Chris Woods came down with what was believed to be a flu, but would in fact transpire to be labyrinthitis. So in addition to the loss of Durant, Rangers would now be without 2 other key players for the difficult Scottish winter. Gentlemen, the injury jinx has returned, so much so, David, that Souness was in talks with Newcastle United to try and bring John Robertson back home to Scotland. He had a very short spell away from Hearts, but it wasn't a deal that could be done in the end. I know what you mean about conditioning and all the stuff we said before. The Woods thing is just, again, another bit of bad luck. And it's
just bad luck, yeah, that one's... And he did look after himself.
Yeah. Same time of year. Those are 3 huge players. It's not Butcher, because we talked, of course, about Butcher's stature, but Durant, McCoist and Woods, still a big spine of the team there.
Well, your goalkeeper. Yeah, and your goalkeeper, in any era, but particularly then, when really the idea was you had your goalkeeper and then you had some bloke, to fill in. Basically, Martyn, every team had a goalkeeper and a Willie Caballero, right, or a Stuart James. They didn't they didn't think that you had 2 good goalkeepers. If anyone's I've had labyrinthitis a few times, because once you get it, you're more susceptible to it, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners have, because it's commonly diagnosed now. It wasn't then, and for months, Alan will remember the press. He had a mystery ear. In that year that was affecting his balance, because I'm not sure, medical professionals will know more than me, if it even had that term yet. If you've had it, it's horrible, because some of the time you feel all right when you've got it, and then you'll go to lean over and you'll just keep falling because you've got absolutely no balance control at all. It makes you feel sick. It makes you feel nauseous. It screws with your balance. It's a horrible illness to have. It's not life-threatening, but it's deeply unpleasant. And as I say, it's now much more commonly diagnosed. But back then we were reading in the papers, Martyn, mystery illness.
Yeah, infection or whatever,
Yeah, and you're thinking, is he coming back? You genuinely didn't know if he would come back. So there was that worry. At this point, I've never seen us in my conscious life win at Parkhead. So my expectations aren't massive.
Yeah.
Rangers have not won at Parkhead since I've been, able to consciously follow football. And we go there and we get the early penalty and we score it. And I'm feeling pretty confident at this point. But then, as you say, you get overrun. And how often do we see that in Old Firm, history, after a real big doing in one of the matches?
The other
when the
one
sides
does it.
are evenly split. Yeah, when there's a more even... I know it would prove eventually Celtic that it wasn't even, but at this point they're the champions and it's still early enough in the season and they haven't gone off a cliff completely yet. Yeah, when the teams are balanced, how often do you see it? Because of exactly what Martyn said there about hunger. We let ourselves down the last one. We cannot do this time. We have to go out and we've got to atone for it. And I think back, of course, the Rangers example being the 6-2 defeat was followed up with a 5-1 game at Ibrox.
Yes.
And it is, I think, hunger. Now, I'm sure that we could all say, oh, it's an Old Firm game, you should be absolutely hungry. Well, yeah, right, I get that. But they were like men possessed that day. They just, there was no way that they weren't getting something from that match. And Rangers made errors, an own goal. He was prolific, wasn't he? Big budget.
Yeah.
Remember that one at Tannadice?
I was just going to say up with the United as well.
A 40-yard diving header, looping diving header over his own goalkeeper. And an own goal gets him back into it, and that gives him the fill. And at Parkhead, especially in that era,
they back.
Yeah, they would just. It would be the cavalry charge, wasn't it, Alan? It was just.
I think even with me, I would go all the time. They would be lucky if with half a dozen chances. I think probably Alec Miller, about 1980 or something, the 2-1 was probably the last time I had seen them as well. Do you know? And so, in a way, you lose 3-1 at Parkhead, but because of the last, I don't know, umpteen years, in a way, you think, well, Parkhead's sort of like that. We just need to get on. As you say, we'd beat them before at ours, and
yeah, and we would go on and then something 4-1 later this year. Or start of next year, but later that season. The expectation levels weren't huge, and I do think that plays into it. I do think the fact is, and it's still home advantage in an Old Firm game is still a huge thing even now, and always will be. But back then in particular, we had a woeful record, and then funnily enough, in the 90s, we were both good at the opposite ground for a while.
Well,
there's
a theory in that which we'll come to.
Yeah, there's a run of poor results, but I just felt that day, we chuck on Andy Gray and we're trying to, we're trying to get something back, but they're in their element. And this was the thing about the Celtic team this season, as we would find out, which was that they'd put everything in 87, 88, absolutely everything. They had really gone for it, right? And there wasn't a lot left in the tank. But this is another example of them, if you like, gathering together, the last remnants of what's in the fridge to make a big dinner. That it was all or nothing on a couple of occasions for them this season, and this was one of them. You can't sustain that. It doesn't sustain over this season. They fall apart completely because there was no foundation to it. But yeah, it's a Rangers team going there. I don't think with the belief that it can get a victory, if I'm being absolutely honest. Going a goal up, and then you've got to expect they're going to fly at you. That's all they've got left for you. And Rangers do not stand up to it, and in the end are comfortably beaten if we're beaten. Really
David, there's a wee bit of a comparison to Europe. I know apart from the ones where we thought if we go through this season we could win it, but over the next umpteen years as well, where you kind of go out of Europe after 1 or 2 rounds, it's a bit like this at Parkhead as a Rangers fan, because when I was thinking about the Cologne one as well, it wasn't like, oh my goodness, devastation. It just became well, we didn't really do too well in Europe. And that mindset seemed to be prevalent in the umpteen years around Parkhead, which obviously, as you say, will have to change. But it was a blow. But again, even good teams would go to Park. That's the thing. You could go to in the good times as well. You could still go to Parkhead and lose.
Yeah.
Anyway,
of course you could.
Well, it's been a long time, though, gentlemen, since we won at Parkhead. The next episode might have some better news on that front. We will get to that, of course, in due course. John Robertson would have been an interesting signing if that had been pulled off.
Great
player.
a great wee player, great wee goal scorer, and actually could play with McCoy, because initially, and over the years, I've heard people say, oh, he was too similar to McCoy. They played for Scotland a few times, and they were very, very decent. They played similarly. He wasn't on the same level anywhere near as Maurice Johnson, of course, but they worked as a twin partnership. You know, they didn't make the same runs as each other. So I don't think that it's beyond the realms of possibility that one could have worked. One of the things I love about it, though, Martyn, is John Robertson refers to that stay at Newcastle as his holiday.
Yeah, he's a Hearts boy, of course. Right, gentlemen, Thank you very much. We'll end there. Thank you, David.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you.
And Alan, as always.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Martyn. Really appreciate it, yeah.
We're leaving you mid-November. Rangers have gone through a bit of a bumpy patch, but still 2 points clear. And the Robertson signing didn't come off, but many would have assumed that Souness would have been in the market to just tide Rangers over this new injury crisis. Very few realised that Souness was currently involved in another deal that would change the pace of the Rangers' modernisation significantly. Until then, bye for now.